Hello everyone, and welcome to round 5 of the 2018 GRENKE Chess Classic. Here we have a game between Georg Meier and Magnus Carlsen, and I'm very happy to be able to show you this game as it's an extremely interesting game, and you'll really understand what they mean by the old saying, the most beautiful part of a chess game is rarely seen. So let's just check a couple of photos before we dive into the game. Here we have a nice close-up of the audience that is observing the games. Here a nice close-up of Magnus Carlsen, probably writing down the first move. Here we have well, it's not a close-up of Georg Meier. And one other thing you have to notice here is that it's a front shot of Georg Meier, but it's actually Magnus Carlsen that's in the focus. So that's what happens when you're a world champion. Even when you're not being recorded directly, you're still in the focus. So here we have a nice photo of Carlsen and Viswanathan Anand taking a nice walk, relaxing from their games, and those are the photos from this round. I do hope you enjoyed that. Now let's check out the game. Meier opens with d4. We have knight to f6, c4, e6, and knight to f3, so the anti-Nimzo. d5, g3, bishop to b4, the standard maneuver, bishop d2, bishop back to e7, bishop to g2, and we have castles. Knight bd7, queen to c2, c6, bishop to f4, knight to e4, h4 now, knight d to f6, knight b to d2, knight captures, and now knight to h5. The only good square for the bishop is e3, so bishop back to e3, and now f5. f5, an excellent move that might be preparing some expansion on the king side later on. Also, this rook might be able to come into the game, and also, and most importantly, creating a nice outpost on e4 for this knight that is currently on h5. So bishop to f3, attacking the knight, queen to e8, defending the knight on h5, and now bishop to g5. And here Carlsen plays the knight back to f6, preparing knight to e4 at some point. An interesting idea is definitely bishop captures on g5, h captures, and queen to g6, with the idea that you want to capture the g5 pawn, but after bishop captures, queen captures, and the knight captures, you are defending the g5 pawn, and after black plays f4, which is kind of the whole idea of this maneuver, then white defends with king to g2, and now white is perfectly fine, even much better, as the rook is now coming to h1. It will be very dangerous for black. So after bishop to g5, knight back to f6, we have e3, and now b6. Rook 8 to c1 and the bishop to a6. And there is no official interview with Carlsen after this game, but you can check out the entire coverage of round 5, and then you can fast forward to the end of the coverage. There you can see a kind of an interview with Magnus Carlsen, where he says that he's not very satisfied with this bishop to a6 move. He could have tried for something better. He mentions knight to e4, the idea being that after bishop captures, queen captures, c captures, and c captures, white doesn't really have the option of exploiting the c file, as the knight on d2 is undefended, and if knight captures, f captures, you move the bishop. Now rook comes to f7. Again, there is no way for white to infiltrate on the c file. The bishop can be developed, then black can even double rooks on the f file, so all is well here. But okay, in the game, bishop to a6 by Carlsen, a3, now knight comes to e4, bishop captures on e7, queen captures on e7, and bishop back to e2. And here Carlsen plays bishop back to b7, waiting to see what happens. b4 by Meier, rook 8 to c8, and now c5. e5 by Carlsen, trying to bust open the center. D captures on e5, queen captures on e5, and knight captures on e4. F captures on e4, and now queen to c3. Here Meier offers a trade of queens. Queen to f5, Carlsen declines, as he does have a lot of pressure on the f file. Also queen to h3 might be an idea in some lines. Here we have a4, and here Carlsen, as he calls it after the game, plays g5, and he calls this a big bluff. The idea is there really is no danger here for white. In the game, h captures on g5 was played, but the even possible was f4. f4 because queen to h3 doesn't give black anything. There's no real threat of queen captures on g3 because white defends perfectly well with rook to f2. And now if you capture it, you get rook to g2, queen captures, and now rook captures on g5, and black is lost. King f7, now rook comes to g7 with check, king moves, queen e5 check, king moves, queen d6 check, king moves, and now queen to d7. This is checkmate. It's not an entirely forced line, but a lot of things can go wrong. So after g5, Meier played h captures on g5, queen captures on g5, and now king to g2, now preparing to bring the rooks over to the h file. Rook to c7, Carlsen prepares to bring the other rook into the game, rook to h1, and now rook to g7. A very deadly and poisonous move by Carlsen. If Meier isn't careful now, for example, if he plays something like c captures on b6 with ideas of creating a pass pawn, then he's actually getting checkmated. It's a forced checkmate in 8 moves. With rook captures, this comes with check, king captures, queen captures on g3, king f1, now rook to f7, the king has nowhere to go, bishop to f3, you have to block, rook captures, king to e2, rook f2 check, king e1, now open a discovered check from the queen, rook a2 check, king moves, and now queen f3, king e1, and queen captures on h1 with a very nice checkmate. So after g7, rook to g7, Meier defends, rook to g1, and we have queen to f5. Rook to f1, defending the f2 pawn, and now bishop to a6. And here it's again a deadly idea by Carlsen. Idea is if you capture the bishop, then queen to f3, and black wins the game. It's a forced checkmate in 7 moves. King to h7. If you go king to h2, if you go king to g1, then rook captures on g3 will be winning. So king to h2, and now rook to g6, threatening rook to h6, followed by rook captures on h1. Only defense is bishop to c8, and now it doesn't matter, rook to h6, bishop blocks, and now rook captures on h3, king captures, and now rook to f5, and there is no defense against rook to h5. So a very nice idea by Carlsen. But after bishop to a6, of course, Meier is not going to fall for this, and Meier plays a brilliant move of his own. He plays b5. b5 with the idea of preventing this tension between the two bishops for one move. Carlsen plays c captures on b5, and now that this tension is no longer here, he uses this chance to bring his rook into the game. Rook to h5 with an attack on the queen. Queen to f7 by Carlsen, and now queen to e5. Bishop to b7, as you can't really capture the pawn here. Your bishop is hanging on a6. You don't really have any moves. So bishop to b7, and here c captures on b6. We have b captures on a4 and b captures on a7. So Carlsen now has a passed pawn on a4, but Meier has a passed pawn on a7. And here bishop to a8. Carlsen blocks the pawn, and here rook to g5 by Meier. Rook to g5 is actually a winning move for white, but when he played it, Meier didn't know it was a winning move. He felt it was a very strong move, and he played it because he wanted Carlsen to capture the a7 pawn. The problem is, if you capture the rook, capturing the rook also doesn't really work for black, because queen captures with check, queen blocks, queen captures, king captures, and now rook to a1, simply going for that pawn, and then you have a passed pawn on a7 and the rook behind it. So bishop to c6 defending it, but now rook to c1 attacking the bishop, and here you don't really have a good move. You can't go bishop to b7, simply rook to c7 will check the king and pick up the bishop. If you try any other ideas, for example, rook to c8, then simply rook captures on c6. After rook captures, you promote to a queen, and after the most obvious bishop to a8, now simply getting the bishop out of the way and also blocking the pawn, then rook to c5 with rook to a5 coming, winning the pawn, and then it's simply a one position. So after rook to g5, Carlsen played queen captures on a7, and here comes the move that Carlsen missed. A brilliant move by Georg Meier, and the only move that actually gives white the advantage, bishop to g4. Bishop to g4, and now black really doesn't have a move. The idea is after if rook captures, then bishop to e6 wins the game. You have to block, now comes queen captures, and after king moves, now rook to c1 and there is no good defense against rook to c8. If you play bishop to b7, simply stopping it, then bishop captures on f7 wins. You're up a whole rook. If you capture the bishop, then you're getting checkmated here. Queen to f6 checkmate. So after bishop to g4, Carlsen has to find a move. He plays king to h8. Definitely an idea, but it doesn't work. It did work in this case because Meier was so low on time that in the game Meier played rook to a1. He decided to go grab this passed pawn and exchange all the pieces here. So this is how the game went on. Rook to a1, Carlsen played queen to e7, and here we have queen captures on g7 with check. Queen captures, rook captures, king captures, and after rook captures on a4, bishop to c6 and rook to b4 was played, and here in this position they agreed to a draw. It's a slightly better position for white. White does have only one pawn island, the pawns are on dark squares, and he does have a light square bishop. But there's no real way to make progress here. But let's return to this position after king to h8. Instead of rook to a1, which Meier played as he didn't find anything else, this is actually a completely winning position for white, and white has a couple of ways to actually win this position. So one of the ways white can win is rook to h5. Rook to h5 is completely winning. And the black doesn't have a good way to prevent this. If you try queen to e7 or queen to f7, let's try queen to f7, you get rook captures on h7, and there is no defense. The rook is pinned. You can't do anything here. If you capture the rook, then comes rook to h1, king moves to g6, and now bishop to h5, simply winning. If you go king to g8, then bishop to e6, you win the queen and the game. But yeah, king g6, bishop checks, king moves, and now bishop captures on f7. This is checkmate. So this is one way to do it. Another thing, after king to h8, even a rook to h1 is winning. You don't have to play rook to h5. Idea being that queen to e7, now offering a trade of queens. Again, rook captures on h7. King captures, and now rook to h5 check. And both Carlsen and Meier said that they saw this position and they couldn't find anything. Okay, you're not gonna go king to g8 to allow bishop to e6, but both of them saw king to g6, and they agreed that there's nothing for white here to do. But actually here, I'm sure you all can see it now that you know that there is something. Feel free to pause the video and find the winning move for white that both Carlsen and Meier missed. So I will give it a couple of seconds, although I'm pretty sure now all of you can see it. The move both of them missed is rook to h6, and after this you would have a brilliant victory against the world champion. Point being that if you capture it, queen to h5 is immediate checkmate, and if you don't capture it, if you go to f7, then you get queen to h5 check, king to g8, and of course rook to h8 checkmate. So although it seems pretty obvious, it's really not, since both Georg Meier and Magnus Carlsen, the reigning world champion, missed it. Okay, albeit they were both in time trouble, but you know, such a shame for Georg Meier missing an opportunity like this to checkmate world champion Magnus Carlsen. So yeah, this is the position. Once again, rook to a1 was played, but rook to h1 or rook to h5, both win the game like immediately. So yeah, that's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it. Well, I'm sure you didn't enjoy rook to a1, but as they say, the most beautiful part of a chess game is very rarely seen over the board. So yeah, I would like to thank Raghavendra Basrur, John Beringer, and Knud Werner for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check two of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon with another interesting game. Oh yeah, and of course, I always forgot. Here are the results after round 5. So things didn't really change. All of the games from round 5 were drawn. Caruana still in first place, Maxime Vachier-Lagrave in second, Vityugov in third, all of them with 3.5. Then with 3 points, Aronian and Carlsen, then Anand and Bluebaum with 2, and Hou Yifan, Meier, Georg, and Naidich Arkady with 1.5 point. And yeah, okay, one other thing I wanted to tell you, I did order this additional LED light to improve with my video quality, as I do have like this huge window behind me, so sometimes it's really problematic with the lights. And then when it finally arrived, I realized that it actually comes without a battery included. So I kind of felt like an idiot, but you know, it happens. So if you're gonna order some additional LED lighting for yourself, or maybe for something you do check that it comes with a battery included. So yeah, that's it. Thank you all, and I will see you soon.